In a tense thriller about a cheating wife, the twist reveals that the woman at the center of the scandal is not the one being unfaithful. She's the mastermind behind it all. Her seemingly innocent husband has been under the impression that she is having an affair, which has torn apart their relationship. But it turns out that the wife orchestrated the entire affair in order to manipulate and control her husband. The wife planted subtle clues, secret messages, altered phone logs, and even a fake lover to create the illusion of infidelity. The husband's reaction to her supposed betrayal fuels the chaos. As he spirals into obsession, hiring a private investigator and confronting her, she plays the victim, feigning sadness and regret. The wife carefully orchestrates everything so that her husband's actions seem like they are pushing her further away, making him appear controlling and paranoid. Meanwhile, she keeps pulling the strings from the shadows. In reality, her affair isn't with another man, it's with power. She's been manipulating her husband's emotions and behavior in order to manipulate a larger financial or social outcome. The real revelation comes when her husband finally uncovers the truth, only to discover that her affair wasn't with a person, it was with a plan. She had been pushing him to the brink of destruction so that she could seize control of their business, wealth, or family assets, all while he was blind to her cunning. She had manipulated him into believing he was the one who was losing control, when, in fact, she had always been the one orchestrating it all from the very start. The Puppeteer's Web Chapter 1. The Illusion Emma. Donovan, poised, elegant, and seemingly the perfect wife, had always been a beacon of calm in the chaotic life of her husband, Michael. They had been married for 12 years, built a life full of shared ambitions, successes, and occasional turmoil. But recently something had shifted. Emma had become distant. Her smiles didn't quite reach her eyes. Her voice lacked warmth, and her gestures had grown calculated, cold. Michael, a successful businessman, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Late nights, unexplained absences, and secretive. Phone calls left him wondering if his worst fear was coming true. His wife was having an affair. It didn't make sense. Emma had always been loyal, devoted, yet the evidence was piling up. He noticed her texting late at night, her increasing reluctance to share details about her day. The cracks in their marriage grew wider, and Michael could no longer ignore them. Chapter 2. The private investigator desperation led Michael to hire a private investigator, hoping to uncover the truth. For weeks, the investigator followed Emma, documenting her every move. The reports that came back were damning. Emma was meeting with a man named Andrew Harrington, a charming, affluent entrepreneur in town. They shared intimate dinners, exchanged lingering touches, and their meetings seemed increasingly suspicious. Michael's suspicions deepened. He confronted Emma, his voice trembling with fury. "Are you having an affair with him?" he demanded. Emma, ever the picture of composure, sighed. Her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. "Michael, I'm not the person you think I am," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I can't keep lying anymore." Her words shattered him. The woman he had loved and trusted for over a decade had betrayed him. His heart sank as Emma left the room, her eyes avoiding his, seemingly indifferent to the destruction she had caused. His world was collapsing, and he had no idea how to stop it. Chapter 3. The Mastermind. But Emma wasn't guilty. Not in the way Michael believed. Behind her carefully constructed persona of the wronged wife, Emma was orchestrating everything from the shadows. She had grown tired of Michael's dominance in their marriage, of his overbearing control. She wanted something more, something greater. She had planned her affair meticulously, setting the stage for everything to unfold. Andrew Harrington wasn't her lover, he was a pawn, an actor she had hired to play the part. The late-night texts were fabricated. She'd used an encrypted app to send him coded messages, and every interaction had been carefully staged. She'd planted the idea of suspicion in Michael's mind, feeding him just enough to ensure that he would investigate. The investigator, too, had been part of her plan. She'd paid him to follow Emma just far enough to collect evidence that would send Michael into a frenzy. All of it was part of Emma's larger scheme. Michael's reactions were everything she had hoped for. As his suspicions grew, so did his paranoia. He began to question his own worth, his control slipping away. The more he doubted her, the more Emma manipulated him, using his insecurities against him. She had orchestrated the affair for one reason: to make him crumble, to break his spirit so completely that he would lose sight of everything they had built, everything that she wanted to claim for herself. Chapter 4. The tipping point. As Michael's obsession with the affair grew, Emma pushed him further into madness. He began to monitor her every move, questioning her every word. His jealousy consumed him, and their once warm home became a battleground of accusations, doubt, and recrimination. But Emma was always calm, poised. She feigned guilt, feigned regret. She played the victim perfectly, telling Michael that he didn't deserve this. He deserved better. And each time she spoke these words, she tightened her grip on him, as though pulling the strings of a marionette. One day, Michael found a folder hidden in her desk. Inside were documents, legal papers, financial records, and the final piece of the puzzle: a contract signed with Andrew Harrington, outlining an investment deal that Emma had secretly secured. The deal was for a business venture that would put Michael's company in jeopardy. It was then that Michael realized the truth. The affair had never been about love, betrayal, or even passion. It had been about power, Emma's power. She had used him, manipulated him into believing he was losing control, all to achieve one thing: total control over everything they had built together. Chapter 5. The Revelation. Michael confronted Emma, this time with cold, calculated rage. "You were never in love with him, were you?" he asked, his voice a low growl. Emma smiled, a faint, knowing smile. "No," she said softly. "I never was. But you were. You were so blinded by your jealousy, your desire to keep control, that you couldn't see." Chapter 6. The final act. Years after Emma's departure, Michael had rebuilt his life. His business, once a thriving empire, had been salvaged from the wreckage of his emotional collapse, yet his heart remained scarred. He had spent years in therapy, trying to understand how he could have been so blind to her manipulations, how he had failed to see the strings she had pulled so expertly. His success was hollow, a shell of the man he had once been. But Emma's shadow lingered in his mind, a constant reminder of the ruthless game she had played. Her absence had been his final lesson, one that he could never quite escape. Then, one evening, Michael received a letter. It was addressed in a familiar, elegant hand, the hand of the woman who had destroyed his life. His heart raced as he opened the envelope, the crinkling paper sending a chill down his spine. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines of text. "You were always the one who could never see the bigger picture, Michael. But now, I have everything I need. Your business, your money, your self-worth. All of it. The strings are mine now. And you, my dear, are nothing more than a spectator." It was a message from Emma, a taunt from the depths of her success. She had sent this letter just to remind him that she still controlled the narrative, that no matter how much he tried to rebuild, he would never escape the reality she had woven around him. The game was far from over. Michael knew at that moment that she had been planning something even greater. There was no way she would simply let him fade into the background. No, Emma's thirst for power and control was unyielding. He had fallen into her web once, but he wouldn't make that mistake again. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, Michael began to dig deeper into Emma's life since her departure. Using every resource at his disposal, he investigated her financial dealings, her business ventures, even her relationships, and what he discovered was both shocking and unsettling. Emma had been involved in several high-profile political and financial dealings, all orchestrated behind the scenes. She had moved on from just manipulating him. She was now manipulating entire industries, companies, and even government figures. Her reach had extended far beyond the borders of their former life. Emma had built an empire, a silent force that no one could challenge. She was no longer just an ex-wife. She was a power broker, a shadow ruler, quietly pulling the strings in ways Michael had never imagined. But the more Michael uncovered, the more he realized one disturbing fact. Emma's plans were never complete. There was always another level, another game to be played. She was always several steps ahead, playing a long, complex game that he could never fully understand. Then one evening, the phone rang. "Michael," a calm voice said on the other end, one he hadn't heard in years. "I think it's time we have a conversation. It's been too long, don't you think?" Emma's voice was smooth, controlled, as if nothing had changed, as if everything was still part of her plan. "You've been looking for answers, haven't you? But you've only scratched the surface. If you want to truly understand what I've built, you'll have to come to me." For the first time in years, Michael felt a sense of dread creep up his spine. He had always thought he had been the one to lose everything, but now he realized that Emma had been playing a game far beyond what he could comprehend. "Why should I come to you?" Michael asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Because," she replied softly, "you're the only piece left on the board. And when I'm done with you, Michael, I'll have everything. Everything that belongs to me." Chapter 8. The Final Move. The meeting took place in the heart of the city, in a sleek, modern building that screamed power. Michael entered the penthouse, suite where Emma awaited, her silhouette framed by the city lights outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. She looked the same as she had years ago, composed, elegant, but there was a coldness in her eyes now that hadn't been there before. It was as though she had completely erased any trace of the woman he had once known. "Welcome, Michael," she said, her voice still carrying that unsettling calm. "You've been wondering how far I would go. The answer is simple. As far as I need to." Michael looked around, realizing that the room was not just a luxurious office, but a command center. Monitors lined the walls, displaying live feeds from cameras, financial data, and global news. She had become more than a businesswoman. She was a puppet master, and the world was her stage. "You've won, Emma," Michael said, his voice hoarse. "I see that now. You've taken everything from me." Emma smiled faintly. "No, Michael, you've lost. The game was never about you and me. It was always about power, who holds it, who controls it. I was just the one who played it best." Chapter 9. The Unraveling. Michael walked out of the penthouse, the weight of his defeat pressing down on him like an anchor. His legs felt heavy, his chest tight, and his mind was spinning with the gravity of the truth. Emma hadn't just outplayed him, she had outgrown him. He was no longer part of her life or her plans. He was simply a casualty in a game much bigger than he had ever realized. As he stepped into the elevator, the doors closing with a soft whoosh, his reflection stared back at him in the polished metal. A man broken, a man who had once believed that love, trust, and loyalty could be the foundation of his life, only to have them ripped away by the one person he thought he could trust the most. The elevator descended, and his thoughts raced. Michael had been blinded by his own emotions for too long, jealousy, anger, fear, while Emma had been calculating, playing a long, cold game that had only one goal: control. She had taken his business, his wealth, and even his dignity. But there was one thing she hadn't taken: his mind. And now he was determined to use it, even if it meant playing her game on her terms. Chapter 10. The unexpected move weeks passed, and Emma's grip on everything continued to tighten. Her empire expanded rapidly, her influence spreading through the media, politics, and business circles. She was a force, and no one could challenge her without paying the price. No one except Michael. He started reaching out to old contacts, to people who owed him favors, to those who had once respected him and his company. He began to slowly build a network, not just of allies, but of people who could help him undermine Emma's empire, piece by piece. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew that to go up against her now, after everything she had accomplished, would be suicide. But he couldn't let her win. Not like this. Michael was careful. He kept his movements secret, his intentions hidden. Emma, after all, had eyes everywhere. But he was no longer the man who had been caught in her web. He had learned, adapted, and most importantly, he had learned how to think like her. The game wasn't over. Not yet. One evening, Michael received an encrypted message. It was from someone within Emma's inner circle, someone he had once trusted. The message was brief, but the implications were enormous. She's planning. Something bigger, something you can't even imagine. Get ready. The message sent a chill through his spine. For the first time in years, Michael realized that the game was not just about wealth or power anymore. Emma's plans had evolved into something darker, something far more dangerous. What was she after now? What could be bigger than what she had already taken from him? Chapter 11. The betrayal Michael's investigation into Emma's growing influence uncovered something far more troubling than he had anticipated. Emma had entered into an alliance with global powers, shadow organizations, that controlled governments, markets, and industries from the background. She was no longer just a businesswoman. She was part of a covert network, and she had plans that reached beyond anything he could have imagined. As Michael dug deeper, he realized the full scope of Emma's ambition. She was not just seeking control of industries or wealth, she wanted to control the very fabric of society itself. She was working on plans to manipulate entire economies, sway elections, and even create a new world order under her reign. Michael's sense of dread deepened. Emma's empire wasn't just about money, it was about shaping the future. And that future, it seemed, would belong to her, and to the unseen forces pulling her strings. But Michael wasn't alone in this fight. He had allies, old friends, former colleagues, who shared his desire to stop her. They all had their own reasons for wanting to see her fall, and together they began to form a plan, one that could expose Emma's true nature and dismantle her empire from the inside out. But just as Michael thought he might have found a way to fight back, something unexpected happened. Emma reached out to him, this time not through her usual channels, but directly. Chapter 12. The offer one night. Michael's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice that answered was unmistakable. Michael. Emma's voice was cool, calculating as always. I think it's time we finally have a real conversation. You've been trying to figure out what I'm doing, haven't you? How I'm doing it. Michael's heart pounded in his chest. He had expected to hear from her, but not like this. Not so calmly, so deliberately. What do you want, Emma? He demanded, trying to keep the tremor from his voice. Not much, Michael, she replied, a smirk audible in her tone. I'm offering you a choice. You've seen what I can do. You've seen what I've built. And now you can either keep fighting it, or you can join me. Together, we could reshape the world. We could control everything, Michael. I could use someone like you at my side. Chapter 13. The Silent War. After the phone call, Michael couldn't sleep. His mind raced as he tossed and turned, trapped between two worlds. Emma's offer lingered in his thoughts like a poison, tempting him with the power she promised, with the chance to return to a life of influence, wealth, and control. Yet he knew that joining her would be the ultimate surrender. It would mean becoming her tool once again, an instrument of her ruthless will. But rejecting her was no less appealing. He had been broken by her once, humiliated in the most brutal way imaginable. And now, after everything she had done, how could he stand by and let her continue to reshape the world in her image? How could he let her manipulate entire nations, economies, and lives for her own gain? The temptation to stop her was just as strong as the pull of her offer. Michael knew there was only one choice that would give him the freedom he needed. He had to take the fight to her. But this time, it wouldn't be a direct assault. It wouldn't be about dismantling her empire head-on. Emma had already shown that she was too powerful, too far-reaching to challenge that way. No, Michael needed a new strategy. He had learned from his mistakes, from the way she had controlled him before. This time, he would play the game, but on his own terms. Chapter 14. The Long Game Over. The next few months, Michael worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He carefully recruited individuals from Emma's inner circle, disgruntled employees, ex-partners, former allies, people who had either been cast aside or manipulated by her. They were the broken pieces of Emma's world, those who had once been part of her grand design, but had been discarded when they outlived their usefulness. With this new network, Michael began to quietly sabotage Emma's operations. It started small. An investment deal she had been counting on suddenly fell through as a key player in her plan decided to back out. A major business partnership turned sour after key confidential information was leaked to the press. A government official she had been in bed with found himself in a scandal that jeopardized her political aspirations. But it wasn't just about small victories. Michael knew that Emma's downfall wouldn't come from individual attacks. It would come from shaking her confidence, destabilizing the very foundations of her empire. He needed to create doubt, to make her question her own control. At the same time, Michael kept a low profile. He made no public moves, kept his name out of the papers. He stayed in the shadows like a ghost haunting her every move. All the while, Emma believed she was in control, thinking that the small setbacks were just anomalies, that her power was unshakable. But the cracks were beginning to show. She began to lose faith in those around her, as her once loyal allies started to falter. Paranoia seeped in, and Emma found herself questioning everyone she had trusted. No one was exempt from suspicion. Chapter 15. The mirror cracks, it all came to a head one late evening. Michael had arranged a meeting with one of Emma's former confidants, a man who had once been a key player in her rise to power. The man, David, was wary of Michael, but after months of careful persuasion, he finally agreed to meet in a secluded cafe. "Do you know why I'm here?" Michael asked as they sat across from each other, the dim light casting long shadows over their faces. David stared at him, his face lined with the exhaustion of someone who had been beaten by the same system they once championed. "You're here because you want to take her down. You think I can help you do that, don't you?" Michael leaned forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "I'm not just taking her down, David. I'm giving you a chance to take back everything she stole from you. She's already turned her back on you once. She'll do it again." David's lips twitched. "You think I don't know that? I've been trying to get out for years, but she always finds a way to pull me back in. I can't just walk away from her. She'll destroy me if I do." Michael smiled, a dangerous gleam in his eye. Not if we destroy her first. You know the cracks are already there. She's losing control. The walls are closing in. David hesitated, his eyes darting around the cafe nervously. What do you need from me? Information, Michael replied. You know her better than anyone. You know how she thinks, how she moves. I need to know what her next move is. David leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. You know what she's planning, don't you? She's already a step ahead of you. Michael remained silent for a moment, his mind calculating the implications of David's words. He had always known that Emma was a master strategist, but he also knew she had a weakness, her overconfidence. She believed she was always the smartest person in the room, and that arrogance would be her undoing. We don't need to be a step ahead, Michael said quietly, his voice steady. The reluctant victory months passed, and the world seemed to settle back into its rhythms. Michael's life had regained a semblance of normalcy. He had learned to rebuild his business, but this time his approach was different. He no longer trusted. Easily, no longer believed that the world operated on ideals of loyalty or fairness. He was no longer the naive man who had been ensnared by Emma's charms. He had learned, perhaps too well, that power was a game of shadows, and he had become an expert player. The media had stopped covering Emma's downfall as intensely, shifting their focus to the next big scandal, the next global crisis. Yet, for Michael, the taste of victory felt bittersweet. He had brought her empire crashing down, but in doing so, he had lost pieces of himself along the way. The destruction of Emma, the unraveling of everything she had built, had consumed his every thought. But now, as he sat in his office late, one evening, he realized something unsettling. He felt no triumph, only emptiness. What did it all matter? The business he had salvaged? The wealth he had regained? They had been hollow victories, victories won in the wake of a life destroyed. Emma's loss had been his gain, but he had paid a price for it, one he was only now starting to understand. The world, it seemed, was full of winners and losers, but no one ever truly came out unscathed. Chapter 18. A new game Michael had thought that when Emma fell, it would be the end of the story. He could move on, rebuild, and leave the past behind him. But Emma's shadow had never fully disappeared. He found himself haunted by thoughts of her, of how she had orchestrated every move, how she had manipulated not just him, but the entire world around her. Even in her defeat, Emma had left an indelible mark on his mind. One day, out of the blue, Michael received another encrypted message. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the sender's name. David. We need to talk. It's not over. Not by a long shot. Emma's not finished, and neither are you. Michael's pulse quickened. He thought he had dismantled everything. Emma was defeated. Her empire was in ruins. But as the message implied, perhaps there was more to the story, something he had missed, something still looming in the distance. He arranged to meet David again, this time in a more secluded location, a small, unassuming cafe on the outskirts of the city. As he entered, he found David sitting alone, his face grim, eyes darting around nervously. Tell me, Michael said, taking a seat across from him. What's going on? I thought it was over. David shook his head. No, I thought the same. But Emma, she's never really gone. I've been watching from the sidelines, and the truth is, she's still out there, rebuilding. She's biding her time, waiting for the right moment to rise again. Michael leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Rebuilding? After everything? How? David's face twisted in disgust. She's not just focused on power anymore. She's focused on control, on complete control. What you saw before, it was just the beginning. Her true goal wasn't just about money or influence. It was about creating a new world order. She's aligning herself with some of the most dangerous players in the world. Michael's blood ran cold. Who? David hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before leaning in. I don't know all the details, but she's making moves in the shadows. There are politicians, businessmen, and tech moguls all involved. She's creating a network, a system where everyone is beholden to her, but they don't even realize it. Yet. Michael sat back, his mind racing. So she's still trying to manipulate things from behind the scenes? David nodded. Exactly. She's the one pulling the strings, even if people don't know it. She's already positioned herself to take control of the global economy again. You saw what she could do before. Now she's learning from her mistakes. This time, she won't be taken down so easily. Michael's mind flashed to the moment when he thought Emma had truly fallen. It had been a sweet, satisfying victory. But now the weight of his actions hit him. He had been naive. Emma was a force of nature. She didn't fall. She only transformed, adapted, and waited for the perfect opportunity to strike back. Chapter 19. The choice David's words lingered in Michael's mind as he walked away from the cafe. The future he had envisioned, one free of Emma's shadow, was slipping away. Her influence was far from gone. It had only evolved, growing in subtlety and sophistication. Emma was still out there, maneuvering in the dark corners of the world. And now it was clear. The game was far from over. Michael had a choice to make. He could ignore the warning signs and hope that Emma would eventually burn herself out, as he had once believed. Or he could take action once again, dive back into the world he had tried to leave behind and face her head-on. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He would have to outthink her, outplay her. The gathering storm in. The weeks following his meeting with David, Michael immersed himself in the shadows once more. The past had taught him to stay alert, to watch for the faintest signs that Emma was rising again. He went through every contact, every lead, every whisper of information he could find. Slowly but surely, the pieces started to come together. Emma had been rebuilding in the background, her network expanding like a spider's web, invisible yet infinitely strong. Michael learned that she had already begun influencing global markets again, though this time with a subtlety that made her moves harder to trace. Instead of direct confrontations, she used proxies, leveraging powerful corporations and political figures, people who didn't realize they were being manipulated. But there was one thing that Michael knew. Emma's pride was her greatest weakness. She could manipulate from the shadows, but she couldn't resist the pull of the spotlight. She had been so intoxicated by her past power that sooner or later she would emerge from the shadows. And when she did, he would be waiting. As the days passed, Michael built his own network. He recruited former enemies, rival businessmen who had felt the sting of Emma's betrayal, hackers who had once exposed her secrets, and even a few political insiders who still harbored grudges against her. Together, they formed a quiet resistance, a coalition dedicated to keeping Emma's influence in check. But as much as Michael prepared for the inevitable return of Emma, he couldn't shake the feeling that this time would be different. The stakes were higher. The rules had changed. And for the first time, Michael questioned whether he was ready for the fight that lay ahead. Chapter 22. The unseen hand Emma's resurgence wasn't immediate, but when it came, it hit like a thunderclap, a series of coordinated financial moves. Destabilized the stock market, and rumors of government corruption began to swirl, all linked to a series of high-level officials with connections to Emma's network. It was a strategic chaos, silent, efficient, and utterly devastating. But Michael knew that behind the chaos, there was a plan. She wasn't just striking for power. She was creating a perfect storm, something that would plunge the world into confusion and uncertainty. And in the midst of that chaos, she would step forward as the hero who could restore order, but only under her terms. As the media buzzed with stories of financial instability and government scandals, Emma remained out of sight. She controlled the narrative from behind the scenes, her face never appearing in public, her voice never heard. Yet every move seemed to push the world closer to the brink of disaster. And it was working. Society was beginning to fragment. Political leaders were bickering, and ordinary people were starting to lose faith in the institutions they once trusted. But Michael wasn't blind to her strategy. He knew Emma well enough to see the game she was playing. He had to be patient. She was testing the waters, seeing how far she could push before the world reacted. But Michael was preparing for the moment when she would make her move, when she would step out of the shadows and claim the power she so desperately wanted. And then, as if on cue, it happened. Chapter 23. The revelation a press conference was held, and the world watched as a new face appeared on the global stage. Emma, looking as poised and controlled as ever, though now with an air of quiet menace about her. She had been building this moment for years, waiting for the right time to make her grand re-entrance. And when she spoke, the world listened. "I am here to tell you all," Emma began, her voice calm, measured, "that what we are witnessing today is not a crisis. It is an opportunity, a chance for us to rebuild, to rethink the very systems that govern our lives. We've been living in the shadow of outdated institutions, systems that no longer serve the people. What we need now is a new order, a new world, and I am the one who can lead us into that future." The media exploded in response. Analysts, pundits, and ordinary citizens alike were transfixed by her words. She didn't come with promises of revolution or chaos. Instead, she offered something far more seductive: hope. Hope that the systems that had failed them could be remade, redesigned, and reborn into something better. Under her leadership, of course. Michael watched the broadcast from the comfort of his apartment, his pulse racing. She had done it. She had re-entered the game, and now she was positioning herself as the answer to all the world's problems. She had learned from her past mistakes, using the chaos she had caused to build herself up as the only person capable of leading the world out of the mess she had orchestrated. Michael's blood boiled. This was exactly what he had feared. Emma hadn't just been playing for wealth and power. She had been playing for control on a global scale. The Ghost in the Machine months passed, and the world began to settle into a new, uneasy rhythm. Emma was gone, her empire reduced to ashes, her name tarnished beyond repair. Michael had taken her place in some ways, inheriting pieces of her influence, but he knew it was not permanent. The world never forgot the ones who had held power, even in ruin, and as he looked at the wreckage left behind by Emma's fall, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left unfinished, something deeper than just a personal vendetta or a power struggle. It started with whispers, rumors circulating. In the underground circles he had once inhabited, the same ones that had served as Emma's playing field. Despite her public downfall, there were murmurs of her presence, silent, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. Like a ghost, Emma lingered, her influence moving through the cracks in the world she had built. Michael dismissed it at first. It was easy to believe that after everything, Emma had simply vanished, a casualty of her own ambition. But the rumors grew louder, and then the message came. It was encrypted, as Emma's messages always were, and the sender's identity was masked. But there was no mistaking the tone, the arrogance. It was her. "You thought I was finished. You thought you won. But I am still here. Watch carefully, Michael. I have always been one step ahead. This is only the beginning." The message hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on dismantling Emma's empire, he hadn't stopped to consider that she might have been playing a different game. What if her defeat had only been a ruse, a means to test his resolve, to see if he would be complacent in victory? The questions began to spiral. Could Emma have anticipated this moment? Was her downfall just a masterstroke, designed to lull him into a false sense of security? The more Michael thought about it, the more it became clear. He was not finished with Emma. And perhaps she was not finished with him. Chapter 27. The Return of the Queen. The world continued to move forward. So did the intricacies of Emma's plan, if indeed it was a plan. At first it seemed like a fluke. Small, unnoticed events that only those deeply attuned to the shifting currents of power might pick up on. A minor tech company she once invested in suddenly spiked in value. A series of political figures who had distanced themselves from her now found themselves aligned with a new, mysterious force that no one could trace back to a single entity. Michael spent sleepless nights diving into every lead, combing through reports, tracking movements. But the deeper he dug, the more elusive the truth became. It was as if Emma was manipulating events from afar, orchestrating a network of players, pulling strings without ever revealing her hand. Then, one day, Michael received a package. No return address. Just a simple, innocuous box with his name printed in bold letters. Inside, there was a USB drive. No note, no explanation, just the drive, as cold and mysterious as the woman who had once controlled the world. He hesitated for only a moment before inserting the drive into his computer. The screen flickered to life with a single video file. He clicked play and Emma's face appeared, smiling as if she had never lost. "Hello, Michael," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "I trust you've been keeping busy. I see you've been trying to find me." How quaint. Her smile grew wider, darker. "You should know by now, Michael, that I never lose." "Not really. What you saw before, that was just the beginning. A chess game where I sacrificed a few pawns to take control of the board." The video continued, but Michael's pulse raced as Emma detailed the next phase of her plan. She had indeed been waiting for the moment when Michael would become complacent. All of her defeats, the public embarrassment, the fall from grace, they had been carefully planned to throw him off balance, to get him to lower his guard. "Now," Emma's voice purred from the screen, "I have everything in place. My empire never truly vanished. It simply evolved, and you, dear Michael, are about to play your final part in my game." The screen went black, and Michael sat there, stunned. She had always been 2 steps ahead, always. The world had thought she was gone, but she had merely been waiting in the wings, setting the stage for her return. And now he realized he was at the heart of it all. Chapter 28. The fall of an empire, Emma's re-emergence wasn't like her previous maneuvers. This time, she didn't need to be in the spotlight. She was everywhere, and yet nowhere. Using digital networks, anonymous alliances, and deep pockets of influence, she began to quietly take control of the most powerful industries in the world, without ever showing her face, and her influence spread like wildfire. In every market, from technology to finance, from government to private sector, Emma's shadow was growing longer. The decisive move. The world was on the precipice of change. As the global financial system continued to teeter and political unrest spread like wildfire, Michael knew that the final confrontation with Emma was no longer a matter of strategy. It was a race against time. Every passing day gave Emma more leverage, more control, and more power. Her empire had become a shadow network, unseen but ever present, quietly pulling the strings of governments, corporations, and individuals alike. No one knew the full extent of her influence, but Michael was determined to expose it. The team he had assembled, those who had once served Emma and now sought to undo her, was ready. They had done everything they could to prepare. They had infiltrated her network, gathered the damning evidence, and found the key players who could testify against her. They had everything they needed, except one thing: access to Emma herself. But Emma had grown even more elusive in her new role, pulling back into the shadows as her influence grew. She had learned from the past. This time she wouldn't let anyone get close enough to expose her. Michael and his team, however, had one advantage that Emma underestimated. They understood her game better than anyone else. They knew how she operated, how she manipulated people, how she controlled narratives, and they had one last, desperate plan. Using the very network that Emma had built to manipulate the world, Michael's team worked tirelessly to lay a trap. They lured Emma's most trusted operatives into the open, slowly turning the tide against her from within. The plan was simple. Create a crisis that would draw Emma out, force her to reveal herself, to step forward and take control. Once she did, they would expose her for who she truly was. The architect of chaos, the puppet master pulling the strings. It wasn't a foolproof plan, but it was the only one they had. Chapter 31. The trap is set. The final move was executed on the night of an international summit, a gathering of the world's most powerful leaders, all of whom were unknowingly under Emma's influence. Michael and his team had managed to insert themselves into the security apparatus of the event, ensuring that they would be in the right place at the right time. The moment Emma made her move, they would be ready. The summit began like any other, with speeches about global cooperation, economic stability, and world peace. But behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. Emma's operatives were quietly pulling strings, ensuring that the outcome of the summit would benefit her hidden empire. All they needed was for her to make a public appearance, to assert her dominance in the global stage. Michael was in position, surrounded by his allies. They had intercepted Emma's communications, and now they knew exactly when and where she would reveal herself. The trap was set. All that remained was to wait for her to take the bait. And then, just as the summit was drawing to a close, it happened. Emma appeared. Her entrance was as calculated as always, calm, collected, and commanding. She walked into the room with the confidence of a ruler returning to claim what was rightfully hers. The media buzzed with excitement, unsure of what was unfolding. Was she here to negotiate? Was she taking control of the summit? Or was this just another carefully orchestrated move in her grand plan? Michael's heart raced as he watched her from across the room. He had prepared for this moment for years. This was the culmination of everything, the moment he would finally expose her to the world. But Emma was one step ahead. She knew they were coming for her. She knew Michael would be ready, waiting to tear down the empire she had so carefully constructed. And so, as she stepped into the room, she activated her final gambit, a move that no one saw coming. Chapter 32. The Last Gamble. The summit room, packed with leaders, security, and media, was suddenly plunged into chaos. The lights flickered, and an eerie silence descended upon the crowd. Then, a single voice echoed through the room. Emma's voice, calm, controlled, but unmistakably present. "Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to the New World Order," her voice rang out, amplified by hidden speakers throughout the room. For a moment, there was only confusion. Then, as screens around the world began to flash to life, a shocking revelation was broadcast. Emma had taken full control of the global digital infrastructure. Her face, her voice, her message, every piece of the puzzle that had been pieced together in the shadows was suddenly laid bare for all to see. And what she revealed was worse than anyone could have imagined. Emma had not only infiltrated every level of society. She had anticipated every move Michael and his team had made. She had created a false network of rebellion, people who appeared to be fighting against her but were, in fact, part of a larger web designed to keep the world distracted while she silently reshaped it from within. The Empire's unseen walls as. Weeks passed. The world adapted to Emma's rule, though few truly understood what that meant. The global order was in flux, reshaped by her quiet but absolute control. She had assumed her position as a shadow ruler, an invisible hand behind every decision, every move, and every shift in the balance of power. People still lived their lives, unaware of the intricate web Emma had woven, her empire flourishing in ways that no one could see. For Michael, the truth of his defeat was an endless ache, a gnawing reminder of his misplaced arrogance. He had been so certain, so sure of his ability to expose Emma, to defeat her. Yet here he was, a man broken and eclipsed by her mastery of the game. She had used him as a pawn, then cast him aside. There was no glory in his defeat, no redemption. Only the quiet realization that Emma had been the architect of everything that had led him to this moment. He tried to move on, to rebuild, but the world felt different. Every step he took was haunted by the knowledge that Emma was still out there, pulling the strings. And as time passed, he realized that his failure had made him something far worse than a mere loser. It had made him a spectator in the new world Emma had created. Chapter 35. The Lingering Pulse. Despite her victory, Emma knew that the world was not fully hers yet. The people, the institutions, the nations, they were all still in a fragile state, teetering on the edge of something greater. Her empire was not complete, not yet. There were still dissenters, still forces working against her. Not many, but enough to be a threat. And there was still Michael. As much as Emma had orchestrated his downfall, as much as she had crushed his resolve and made him believe that he had lost, she never completely underestimated him. Michael had been a worthy adversary, a strategist in his own right. Even though he had failed to see the bigger picture, Emma understood that he was far from finished. He had become her shadow, and the best way to solidify her victory was to ensure that he was finally broken, not just in spirit but in purpose. But Michael had not yet realized his new role in the world Emma was building. He had been reduced to a ghost, an observer, unable to move, trapped in the ruins of his former self. Emma knew, however, that eventually he would find a way to return. People like him didn't simply vanish. They always found their way back, driven by a need for resolution. And Emma was prepared for that moment. She had already laid the groundwork for Michael's return. She was watching him, always watching. And when the time was right, she would offer him something far more dangerous than a chance for redemption. An opportunity to become part of her new world, to join her rather than fight against her. Chapter 36. The Siren's call months passed before Michael received another message. This time, there was no encryption, no coded language. It came straight to his inbox, a message from an anonymous source. You think it's over. You think she's won. But she hasn't. Not yet. The walls of her empire are cracking, and there's still a way to stop her. You've seen her play the game. You know how she thinks. You know the rules. It's time to play again. The message was brief, but it left Michael with a cold, electric sensation. There was something in the tone, something familiar. He knew this voice. He had heard it before. He had heard it in his darkest moments. His instincts told him to ignore it, to walk away, to accept that Emma had won and that the world he once knew was gone. But he could not. The game, the unfinished business, the unresolved tension, it gnawed at him relentlessly. The trap had been set, and once again, Michael found himself at the center of it. Chapter 37. The Deal with the Devil the Days Following. The message were filled with sleepless nights and a flood of new information. Michael had been contacted by a figure from his past, someone close to Emma's inner circle, someone who had defected from her network. They had promised him the one thing he had been searching for since the moment Emma had defeated him, a way to finally bring her down. The plan was simple, or so it seemed. This source had inside information about a vulnerability in Emma's empire. It was a chink in her armor, a crack in her otherwise impenetrable foundation. The person who had contacted Michael had evidence of it, evidence that could topple Emma's carefully constructed network and expose the hidden control she wielded. But as Michael delved deeper into the plan, he began to realize that there was more at stake than he had initially thought. This wasn't just about stopping Emma anymore. It was about becoming part of something much larger, much more dangerous. The source made it clear they needed Michael, his expertise, and his knowledge of how Emma thought. They needed him to make the decisive move, one that would require him to go to the heart of Emma's empire, the edge of oblivion. Michael's heart thudded with a heavy rhythm as he prepared for the final act. The world was on the edge of collapse, teetering between the reign of Emma's invisible empire and the fragile hope that someone could still stand against her. But Michael knew this was not just about overthrowing her. He had learned enough to understand that power, once accumulated, wasn't easily discarded. Emma's empire had grown from the shadows, built on the broken fragments of the world. To challenge her meant more than a political upheaval. It meant resetting the entire order of things. And yet, there was no turning back now. His contacts had arranged everything. He had infiltrated one of Emma's most secure data centers, a place where the final keys to her control were buried deep. It was rumored that Emma had anticipated every move he could make, even this one. But the risk was too great, and the stakes too high. For the first time since Emma had re-emerged, Michael wasn't just playing to survive. He was playing to reset everything, to tear down the empire that had consumed the world. He made his way through the halls of the facility, the air thick with tension. His mind flashed to Emma, how she would react when she realized he was here, how she would see him, not as an adversary, but as a tool to be used, a part of her grand design. His footfalls were muffled against the cold steel floors, the humming of high-tech equipment surrounding him like an eerie lullaby. He had done his research. He knew the layout, the security systems, the staff schedules. He was ready, or so he thought. As he reached the heart of the facility, the final vault, where Emma's ultimate control was stored, his fingers hovered over the terminal. The countdown had begun. The world's fate was balanced in his hands, and all it would take was one wrong move for everything to collapse. He was acutely aware of the force he was up against. Emma had built her empire on secrets, on surveillance, and manipulation. One slip, and he would be exposed. She would know. His mind raced as the terminal blinked to life. There was no turning back. Chapter 40. The Hidden Hand. Just as he was about to initiate the final sequence, his earpiece crackled to life. The voice that came through was calm, composed, and unmistakably familiar. "Did you really think you could stop me, Michael?" It was Emma. Her voice was cool, almost mocking. "I've been waiting for this moment," she continued, her words cutting through the static. "You see, I never truly let you go. Not really. I knew you would return. I knew you would try to finish what you started, and I knew exactly how you'd do it." Michael froze. His hand still hovered over the terminal, uncertainty creeping through him like a creeping poison. This was a trap. It had always been a trap. "You think you can destroy everything I've built with the press of a button?" Emma's voice continued, now laced with a dangerous amusement. "No, Michael. I anticipated this long before you ever figured it out." The walls around him seemed to close in, and Michael's breath caught in his throat. He had been led here, he realized, not as a savior, but as the final piece of her puzzle. "I created you, Michael. Every move you made, every decision you thought was your own, was part of my design. You were never my adversary. You were my contingency plan." A cold shiver ran down Michael's spine as the terminal before him flickered to life, showing not just the vault's contents but something far more terrifying. His own face was projected on the screen. His every step, every decision, every key stroke over the past months had been anticipated. Every action, a piece of the game she had orchestrated. The door behind him slid open with a soft hiss, and out of the shadows stepped a figure. Not Emma, but a close replica, someone he had once thought was lost in the wake of his battles with her. It was a clone, a silent reflection of Emma herself, a physical embodiment of the empire she had built. His jaw clenched as he realized the depth of her reach. "Meet my final act, Michael." Emma's voice echoed from the speakers once again. "The last move you can't counter. You thought you were the one pulling the strings? How quaint. But the truth is, I've already won. You just don't know it yet." Chapter 41. The Choice. The replica moved toward Michael, its movements fluid, eerily familiar. It was as if Emma herself stood before him, yet it was a hollow version of her, designed for one purpose: to bring Michael's plans to ruin. "Destroy it all, and you destroy yourself," the clone said, her voice a perfect echo of Emma's. "I've given you every tool, every chance. Now you must choose. Will you be a pawn, or will you be the king?" Michael's mind raced. This was it, the final choice. He had been played from the start. He had always thought that by taking down Emma he could reshape the world. But the truth was darker. Emma had already broken the system. The collapse. The world outside the facility was chaos. News outlets erupted with breaking stories as the system that had held the world together for so long suddenly faltered. In one catastrophic moment, Emma's empire, once untouchable, was unraveling. The digital infrastructure she had so meticulously built, the silent networks of power and influence, began to crack. But it wasn't as simple as flipping a switch. It wasn't as easy as just destroying her systems or disabling her control mechanisms. No, Michael had just initiated something much more complex. Inside the facility, the lights flickered back to life, casting long shadows over the cold steel walls. The replica of Emma, her clone, stood frozen. Its programmed commands failed as the last piece of her network collapsed. But Michael knew better than to think this was over. The consequences of what he had just done would take more than a few hours, days, or even weeks to fully unfold. The chain of events he had set in motion was irreversible. He glanced at the terminal, where the corrupted data still blinked, taunting him. It was not just Emma's control systems that were compromised. The very fabric of the world he had known, the economies, the governments, the systems that had been operating on her invisible rule for years, was crumbling. A new power vacuum was forming, and in that vacuum there were no guarantees. It was an unstable chaos that would ripple across the globe, but Michael couldn't look back now. His choice had been made. With the clone deactivated, he turned toward the exit. He had no idea where it would lead him or what he would find when he emerged from the shadows of Emma's empire. His purpose had always been clear: to destroy the system, to stop the empire from ever fully taking root. But now, as the world around him fractured, he realized something deeper. Perhaps there was no rebuilding the world they had known. Maybe the old world had to be torn down, like a decayed foundation, before something better could rise from the rubble. But what could that something be? Chapter 44. The Aftermath. As Michael emerged from the facility, the first rays of daylight broke across the horizon. The city outside was a mix of confusion and panic. People were beginning to realize that something had changed, that something was missing. The familiar systems of control had been disrupted. The global financial markets, previously held together by the invisible threads Emma had so carefully spun, were crashing. National governments, once influenced by her covert power, were now in disarray, unsure how to navigate the emerging chaos. Michael moved through the streets, his mind spinning with possibilities, the power structures that had kept the world in. Balance were crumbling, but in their place, there was a strange and uncertain freedom. It was a world on the edge of a new beginning, or perhaps its final descent into oblivion. There were no easy answers, but Michael had already accepted that. In the distance, a group of protesters gathered in front of a government building, their voices rising in anger and confusion. The rebellion against the system, against the empire that Emma had created, was taking shape. But it was messy, unorganized. It was a revolt without a clear leader, a mass of people who knew they wanted change but had no idea what that change should look like. Michael knew that the battle wasn't over. Emma's influence, though fractured, would not disappear easily. She was too smart, too resourceful. And there were still those who believed in her vision, who would try to rebuild what had been destroyed. The world wasn't ready for true freedom. It needed guidance, leadership, and vision. It needed someone to step forward, to shape the chaos into something meaningful. But Michael wasn't sure if he was the one to lead. As he walked through the streets, people looked at him, unsure whether he was a friend or foe. He was neither. He wasn't a hero or a villain. He was just a man who had played the game and had come out on the other side, scarred but alive. His decisions had brought him to this moment, and now there was only one choice left: to rebuild or to let the world burn. Chapter 45. A new beginning days turned into weeks. Michael kept his head low, moving through the fractured world, watching as the pieces fell into place. In some parts of the globe, old power structures reformed, trying to consolidate what was left. In others, there was a rush to create something entirely new, a rebellion against the old ways, a cry for freedom that had no clear direction. It was a time of confusion, of fragmented hope and desperation. But one thing was clear: the world could never return to what it had been. Then, one day, Michael received another message. It was cryptic, but it was enough to stir something inside him. The game isn't over, Michael. You know what's at stake. You can either build or destroy what's left. The choice is still yours. The awakening. The weeks following Michael's decision were filled with tension and uncertainty. He had taken his first steps as a leader, but the road ahead was anything but clear. Across the globe, the remnants of Emma's empire continued to disintegrate, leaving behind a world fractured into competing factions. Governments scrambled to restore some semblance of order, but they were unprepared to face the sheer scale of the collapse. The systems that had once kept the world stable were crumbling, and people were beginning to lose faith in the old structures that had failed them. As Michael began to gather the scattered remnants of the resistance, he faced a new challenge: how to unite these fractured groups into something meaningful. The rebels, the anarchists, the idealists. They all had different goals, different ideas of what the world should look like. Some wanted to rebuild the old order, while others sought to tear down everything completely. The task ahead wasn't just about defeating an empire. It was about reshaping the very idea of power. Michael's first step was to reach out to the leaders of these fractured groups. He knew that Emma's vision had been rooted in control, but his vision had to be different. He had to find a way to inspire the people, to convince them that a new order could emerge, one built not on control, but on mutual respect and freedom. It wouldn't be easy, but it was the only way forward. He held his first meeting in a clandestine location, an old warehouse in the heart of a city now ravaged by the chaos. Around the table were representatives from every faction: former government officials, leaders of underground resistance groups, technologists, economists, and even ordinary citizens who had risen up in the wake of Emma's downfall. Michael stood at the head of the table, his mind racing. He had to sell them on the idea of unity. not as a single force, but as a collective effort to build something new. The old world had failed, but the new world could be different. But could they see it? "I know what you're all thinking," Michael began, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "We've spent years fighting against the system Emma built, and now we find ourselves standing at the edge of something even more dangerous, the possibility of no system at all. Chaos has always been the easiest path to destruction, but it's not the path we need. We need a new world, built on cooperation, not domination, not control." There was a silence in the room, heavy with skepticism. He could feel their doubt, their hesitations, but Michael knew he had to push forward. "I'm not asking you to forget everything that came before," he continued. "We all have our scars, our losses, but I'm asking you to think beyond revenge, think beyond the destruction. We have a chance to reshape this world into something that works for all of us, not just the powerful, not just the elite, for everyone." The room was still, but the tension in the air began to shift. Some of the representatives exchanged glances. Others simply stared at Michael, trying to read him. They had seen countless leaders rise and fall, each promising something better, only to fall victim to the same thirst for power that had driven Emma. Michael paused, letting the silence hang for a moment before continuing. "Emma is gone, but her influence still lingers in every system we rely on. The financial structures, the government systems, the surveillance, the manipulation. It's all connected. To dismantle that, we need to break the old habits of power. We need to build something new, together." One by one, the representatives spoke. Some were still uncertain, questioning the practicality of Michael's vision. Others, however, began to see the spark of possibility. Slowly, the room began to shift, a quiet agreement forming among them. There was no single solution, no one perfect plan, but Michael's message had resonated. By the end of the meeting, they had agreed on the first steps, to begin re-establishing communication channels between the fractured factions to create a council of leaders who would help steer the world away from chaos and toward a cooperative future. But it was just the beginning. Michael knew that the real challenge lay ahead, convincing the rest of the world that they could build a future without repeating the mistakes of the past. Chapter 49. The Shadow of the Past. Despite the momentum that Michael had begun to build, the shadow of Emma's empire loomed large. There were still powerful forces in play, loyalists to Emma's vision who were determined to rebuild her system. Some were former members of her inner circle, still operating in the background, pulling strings and manipulating events to maintain their hold on power. Others were more shadowy groups, mercenaries, and opportunists who saw the instability as an opportunity to seize control for themselves. Michael had to move quickly.